or rather. Let me begin by asking to take his seat in the town hall, the Strategy and Portfolio Management Director at Sonagol, Helder Nuno Lisboa. Please, a round of applause as he takes his seat in the town hall. Thank you. Joining him is Executive Director with the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, the authority in charge of health, safety, and environment. Let's welcome Dr. Mustafa Lamode to his seat in the town hall. Also in the town hall, I'd like to welcome the Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Oil Marketing Companies and the African Regional Director of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, the African region, Dr. Riverson Opong. You're welcome. Managing Director of CTEC Africa Limited is on the panel. Let's welcome Gary Steele. Executive Secretary of Africa's foremost organization for the downstream in the continent is here also in the town hall. Let's welcome Engineer Anibo Kraga, Executive Secretary of African Refiners and Distributors Association. Joining them is the Group Chairperson of CEF Group. We welcome Ayanda Noor to her seat in the town hall. And the person leading conversations in this afternoon's town hall meeting is the Vice President and Global Head for Fuels and Refining at S&P Global Commodity Insight. Welcome, Daniel Evans. And so, Mr. Evans, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Good afternoon to the panel. Hope you've all had a good start to the week and an energetic start to the week with what we saw this morning. So we're going to spend the next hour talking about cleaner fuels and how that links with a just energy transition. And I think in many parts of the world, energy transition means less oil demand. But in many African countries, actually oil demand is set to grow and grow for the foreseeable future. And in some sectors, like cooking, we're actually going to transition towards oil, not away from it. So what we're going to do is spend some time discussing how to reconcile those things, how to make sure that we're supporting that oil demand growth, making the necessary investments in the infrastructure, in refining, in storage, in distribution, but at the same time, keeping an eye on how to drive down emissions as we look towards a lower carbon future. So let's get started. And Annabelle, I'd like to start with you and have you sort of set the scene for us, because I know that ARDA has done a lot of work looking at the pathway, not just for the next decade, but for the next several decades, and really focusing on how you put these different pieces, these different objectives together.
All right, thank you, Daniel, and fellow panelists and ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting Arda back. I think the first thing I would like to say, just building on your comments, is that Africa has to have energy to transition. You can't transition if you don't have energy, right? And when you look at the statistics, cumulative CO2 emissions to date, biggest contributors EU, 33%, North America, Asia, 29% each, all of Africa combined, 2.73%. If you back out North Africa and South Africa, the remaining 48 countries have only 0.55% contribution. So it's not one size fits all. So at ARDA, we said, look, to your point, energy demand in Africa is going to grow significantly, about 45% between now and 2040. At the same time, 1 in 2 people born globally is going to be African. By 2050, we're going to have 3 of the top 10 populations in the world: Nigeria, Ethiopia, DRC, in Africa. So if we do not have a clear, coordinated action towards having cleaner fuels, we're going to have a public health nightmare on our hands. And that's something I don't think really comes out. When you talk cleaner fuels, they don't realize that in Africa, we have 11 different grades of gas, oil, or diesel with specifications from 10 ppm to 10,000 ppm, 12 different grades of gasoline from 10 ppm to 2,500 ppm. So we must also think about that in the general scheme of things. So what ARDA did is they said, look, on the path to energy transition, we are focusing on this on three legs. The first one is on cleaner transport and cooking fuels. We must harmonize our fuel specifications, and we're working with the African Union on that to have what we're calling AFRI 6 or 10 ppm sulfur specs across the continent. We're going to work with the African Union Commission and the regional economic commissions on that. We must also focus on LPG for clean cooking as a better alternative to biomass. I think the numbers that we talked about this morning, 900 million to a billion people without access to clean cooking, but it's actually beyond that. LPG has been proven to actually reduce carbon emissions. So it's also part of the energy transition journey. And last but not least, the storage and distribution infrastructure to actually deliver these clean fuels across the continent. That's the first leg. And it's important to think about that because given the infrastructure deficit we have on the continent, we keep bringing, we don't bring large enough vessels into our countries, and as a result, all these STS and stuff we do increases carbon emissions and pollution. So that's the first leg. Second leg is, of course, renewables, sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, and the like. And the third leg, of course, is cleaner primary energy sources, moving from coal and oil to natural gas, and also making sure that on the path to electric vehicles, which I do support long term, we need to be realistic about where we are on the continent. One of my best friends saw Tesla in Lagos. When he asked the guy how he powered it, the guy had a generator in the back of his car. True story. That's the reality for Africa. So, what we decided is that we as Africans must take a step forward in determining what we want to invest in over the next 3 decades. And that's what you were talking about. So, we call it a tale of 3 decades. Between now and 2030, for Africa, our focus is on cleaner transport and cooking fuels, upgrading our refineries, decarbonization, fuel choices to reduce the carbon footprints, and start to produce cleaner, lower sulfur fuels on the continent. LPG for clean cooking, major initiative. We were at the IEA Clean Cooking Summit in Paris earlier this year, where it was clearly stated that for $4 billion a year between now and 2030, we can eradicate the clean cooking problem. So we're focused on that. And the last thing, of course, is infrastructure, what I mentioned. We don't mind renewables, but what we like to say is given the fact that most of the technology for that is in prototype or demo stage, we can start to grow that as it becomes more cost effective. So that's kind of what we're doing, identifying that and putting a finance plan in place for that to ensure that we as Africans determine what energy transition means to us and we actively put in place the structures, frameworks to deliver energy transition as envisioned by us. Thank you.
That's really interesting. I think it makes a lot of sense. Ayanda, I want to come to you and just ask you to respond to that and how you think about what Annabor's just laid out, and also 2050 net zero. Is that a realistic timeline? Is that something that you're focused on? Is it something that African countries should be focused on?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity, and good afternoon to the panel. In fact, just sitting here amongst all these men, I actually do think that the first transition is changing these demographics. I cannot be the only female in a panel in 2024. I mean, really, it is an embarrassment, I must say. I feel very uncomfortable just from that point of view. So that is the first part that we need to change. We need to have more representation of women here so that we can talk about these issues. And I'll tell you why also just in a moment. So if I just think about the dichotomies of Africa, this is a very poor continent. It's already been mentioned that over 600 million Africans don't have access to electricity. Over a billion don't have access to cooking. And that is really talking now to the core of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, physiological needs. How can you have a continent this big with people that still don't have shelter over their roof over their heads, no food, no water, no energy? It actually makes it very difficult to function. And I think also that if you think about Africa having 65% of our land arable, and yet we have starvation on the continent, it also is another area that needs a lot of focus because food insecurity already talks to the challenges of the continent. Um, on the other side, you find that with all of these social ills that I've mentioned, on the other side, we actually are a very rich continent. We're endowed with natural resources. We've got a lot of fossil fuels, your coal. We've got a lot of renewable energy sources. We have hydro resources as well. We really have a lot in terms of the what we can actually use. So it's really two extremes that we're sitting with as a continent. I think it's really urgent for us as a continent to develop and grow our economies so that we can create those sustainable jobs and also be able to grow our infrastructure so that our people can get their products to market. Otherwise, if you don't have infrastructure, you are not able to trade and interact with everybody else around the world. What is very interesting for me also is that if you look at net zero 2050 and you look at countries like Asia, China is looking at net zero 2060, I think. So they shifted it out from 2050 because they have their own internal needs that they believe they need to satisfy. Um, on the other hand, if you look at who is the most polluter, I think my colleague has already mentioned the biggest polluters. Africa is only what, 3-4% contributor to CO2 emissions?
I think Annabelle was number was even less
It
than
was
that,
even
right?
less, precisely. But the point is, we are bearing the brunt of the global warming. Look at the weather. I mean, in South Africa recently, we had snow in spring. And I was looking at the weather forecast the other day, still snow in summer. So we are bearing the brunt of all of these things. And I think particularly women are also particularly negatively affected by this. In fact, I certainly recall some few years ago where a woman gave birth on top of a tree because there was so much water around. So, we really have these big challenges. And therefore, the question we have to ask is how quickly do we move to net zero as the African continent? And it's very important that we also have an agenda that is unified. We have to work together as the African continent and not work as silos because that actually defeats the whole purpose and we're not able to achieve the goal of decarbonization. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but we have to work as a unit, as a continent.
That's interesting. I think I've heard two things, at least two common points between what you've said. One is about the need to work together, right? To recognize the differences of different countries, but to work together to build consistency in fuel specs, to build a common narrative for the continent. But also the need to sort of focus on what should be a priority for Africa right now, and that's not the same as what the priority is in Europe or North America or China or elsewhere. So Gary, I want to bring you in, right? And based on what you've heard, what should be the one top thing that downstream companies, regulators, government should be focused on right now?
I think that's on, yeah. Um, I think we've already talked about the fact that the demand for traditional fossil fuels, in particular transport fuels, is only going to increase over the next few decades. Um, sure, in terms of energy mix, even if the the fossil fuels portion falls slightly, it's still part of a bigger cake because the cake is getting bigger. So really, it's imperative that there's investment in the downstream. And I know this is primarily a sort of an upstream event, but I have to stress, that the downstream is hard. It's hard work. It's different from the upstream. Uh, Companies work with slim margins, with fragile supply chains, and there's a constant struggle for investment, so they can invest in the necessary infrastructure upgrades that will meet this increasing demand. It needs governments to understand the downstream and to put in place government support, clear regulatory policy, and regulatory certainty in the market. Um, we hear sort of drill, baby, drill, which is great. But once you produce, you need to transform that crude into something useful. And of course, that's where the downstream comes in. You could export it to other, internationally to other countries and help them solve their energy security issues. But really, Africa needs to be investing in its downstream to be able to look after its own energy security, and as we said, use its abundant resources.
So just to interject then, Gary. So I think you're saying downstream is critical both for upstream players in Africa, producing countries, but also for governments seeking to ensure that supply security, that energy security for their populations.
Yes, I mean, eventually, we originally people said, well, you don't actually need refineries in Africa because there are lots of refineries around the world. But as we've seen, refinery after refinery close in the Northern Hemisphere. It comes to a point you start thinking, well, hang on a minute, where is that product going to come from? So there has to be a well thought out plan.
So, Helder, I'm going to bring you in a minute and ask you what your priority should be and whether that aligns with Gary. But first, Riverson, I want to come to you, right? Because you're working in your role, you're working with many different companies, local companies, international companies. What are they focused on? And is energy transition in their mind at all? Or are they really focused on some of the more urgent, immediate priorities that we've just been talking about?
Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. That's a very powerful question, though. But what I'll say from the onset will be the fact that I'm personally happy and I thank God that there's energy transition today on personal level. Um, my members do have different priorities because, like I have international players and I have indigenous players. So obviously, international players today would have their strategy stemming from the global perspective. So look at Shell strategy now, different from whatever it was 10 or 15 years ago, same as Total. But the local companies who really want to understand how the global trend will be will still want to play along. Um, but you also want to understand that the demand for petroleum product is still increasing for obvious reasons. Um, so why am I happy for? The fact that there is energy transition. This is not when it started. Like I always say that this is not the first ever transition mankind is facing on. The energy space. We've transitioned from wood to stone age to coal. We're going to gas now. From gas, we're going to go somewhere. But until then, it started with climate change. It moved on to what we call the peak oil concept. Today, we are talking about the energy transition. But I believe for those who have been in the industry for more than 15 years, understand that 50 years ago, all conferences globally were talking about peak oil concept. It didn't sink till we now have energy transition. It seems to me that Africa kind of had an eyebrow rose after we hear about energy transition. But the question you're going to ask yourself is, why is Africa worried about energy transition? At the end of the day, who benefits from the oil that we produce? Who benefits from the gas that we produce? We don't, you know. And we need to now sit and discuss how to maximize the product that we have. This topic is very actual because um, Gary mentioned it. Today, as we speak, across Africa, 50% of the CO2 emitted today is from the transport industry. And let me make this joke, but it's serious though, that it's not only because of the higher ppm that we sell, not only that, but some of the engines of the car that we have also emits more, not just because of the fuel it's using, but because of the age. So you can go and buy a 10 ppm fuel, but because of the age of your engine, it's still going to produce CO2 in the system or into the atmosphere. So that also needs to be taken care of. I remember when I met the Minister of Energy in charge of gas of Nigeria early this year, before they enrolled the CNG policy. One of the critical things we're looking at are the sustainability of implementing the CNG into the automobile mix. We're looking at the pricing, we're looking at and even the infrastructure plan, because again, it took so many years, it took Nigeria so many years to understand that there were much value for LNG. We are happy, and natural gas, we're happy that gas is now, kind of a transition fuel, but where is it going to end? Today, the demand for gas in Ghana has doubled. Supply is limited. And one of the reasons why anybody is going to switch a fuel will be the three things I always say: its availability, accessibility, and affordability. You can run it through every sort of fuel. And that is how fuel transition in the past. People choose to buy whatever fuel for whatever purpose because of its availability. How am I going to get it? Am I going to get it every year? Is it reliable? And how affordable it is before we talk about sustainability? Because sustainability for me simply talks about something I can have today and I can have tomorrow. That's what I'll define sustainability about. I still prefer to have my jollof rice cooked on charcoal. The Nigerians here will understand why. The best jollof rice cooked in West Africa is cooked on charcoal. I'm not against LPG. Don't come and kill me here. I promote LPG back home. I'm happy the MP is also here, implementing several policies to make sure that the accessibility and affordability of LPG is met back at home. But I don't see myself having my grill kebab or beef on a gas. I want to have it on a charcoal to have that taste of charcoal in it, you know. That being said, demand for energy will increase for two reasons. And I'm very happy with what the other rep here mentioned. Demand for energy because of population. And this is where Africa will sit in. By 2050, we expect 2.5 billion extra people on this continent. People are affluent. How many of us flew in here on a solar plane? Raise your hand. We all flew in with a jet. How much CO2 have you emitted? Even those fighting climate change, they fly using the normal flight. I'm not ready to fly, a solar plane at night. Imagine turbulence happen. You start saying your last prayers. But we'll get there because there are some hydrogen-based photo cells coming up. We accommodate and we are going to accommodate going forward all sorts of fuel, like Doc here said, because the demand for energy is increasing. If I get the funds to buy an electric vehicle, I'll buy it. Believe me. But we live in a continent where we produce electricity just to put our fans and our electricity on. Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah created the hydropower back in Ghana, not for electricity at home, but for industrialization, to supply electricity to VACO. VACO had to be collapsed because the demand for electricity back home at our homes had increased. Nyerere of Tanzania created the first electricity in Tanzania, not because of light, because of industrialization. Today, if you look at the demand for electricity from home and industrialization, it's meet up at the peak. We are focusing on how to just generate light to sleep in instead of thinking about industrialization. All sorts of fuel will come in. All sorts of fuel come in handy. We need all sorts of fuel to generate the industry that we want to have. And that's what our members will promote. Thank you.
So thank you. So the energy transition's still some way away from your grill, but at least we know where to go if we want some good charcoal grilled meat. So, but some serious points there. It's very serious points about availability, accessibility, affordability, right, and how they trump sustainability to a certain extent right now for many people on the continent, but also elsewhere in the world. Um, so Helder, bring you in now, and from Sonengal's perspective, I mean, what are you prioritizing right now?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. So before I start, allow me to, um, from the men, apologize to the lady in the audience. Yes, we need to change, but let me give you some comfort. I run a team with more or less 65% of human. Ladies, human, young humans, very talented. At the end of the day, we need to count on them, everyone, no distinctions. The, the good ones will come up. Daniel, allow me to go back to the open ceremony. And one of the things that we hear people saying was, and it was already mentioned here, was the 3% contribution of Africa. It is very important to take notice of it. Second, climate justice. We also see from the open ceremony the two gentlemen that went and claim justice for the climate, and this is good. So what they believe for, but again, we need to raise that question: what is the situation of electricity in Africa? When I go home, I'm pretty sure that my kids eat. I have a nanny home, their kids eat. I have a driver. So even the population, they got food. I think we start to talk and thinking about priorities. Yesterday, I went to the section, ExxonMobil Foundation section, I believe it was an afternoon. I got really, really surprised. So I saw young kids doing projects. One's from Angola was doing like a clean, a machine that would do a clean water. There are another group of teams that were doing grabs trash to create electricity. Well, we have a lot to think about it, but don't get me wrong. We are committed with the transition. We support the transition. Going back to Angola, the really key is to try to understand what is the impact of it on social and economic to the population. When you are thinking about the transition, you need to go on that direction. From the government, we got two paperworks, one that is calling the 2015 Angola long-term strategy. So from the government, we set a way to go on that strategy. Also, we have 2023, 2027 development national plan that is relating with the transition energy. So on that position, Sonangol have been becoming an energy company. Being an energy company, we think about crude, gas, and renewable. We can pick one of the three. But at the end of the day, I need to go for what we've been saying for a while. Drill, baby, drill. I got a drill to find. I got a drill to invest on renewable. So I got to invest on our fossil fuels, to invest on the fossil fuels. The end of the day, what I'm saying is our vision, Sonangol vision to the transition is this transition has to be fair. Fair depending on the countries. And from Africa, we know what we're referring fair is giving electricity and giving food for our population. Drill, baby, drill. Yes, but let's drill better. Let's engage on decarbonization. Find a way, equipments and ways to drill better and try to reduce CO2 emissions. We would like to do that on Senegal right now. We are on a mission to measure our emissions because even though we talk about reduction, we need to measure and make sure we understand where we are. I already hear here from the podium, energy efficiency and energy security. So we need to make sure whatever we do on transition world, on renewables, needs to be profitable. We are in a business to make money. We follow, we believe, and we need to give back to our ownership the return of the investment that they will do. So again, priorities. One, drill baby drill. Again, for the third time.
Yeah.
Second, everyone needs to think about strategy. We need to talk with each other. We need to talk internally, and we need to decide what is the best for us. Third, and to tell you the truth, for me, is been the most important, is meaning that we are together. We, Africa, have been showing that we are together. Today, we can talk about the requirements to get finance out in Europe, but today we are starting to think about finance come from Africa. Each other we can be better, each other we can help each other, we can help one to another, and to tell you the truth, this is the priority right now. Thank you.
Great comments. I mean, I think round of applause. So I think I heard an overarching priority in what you said, which was really kind of drill, baby, drill, but as a means to developing the economy towards ending poverty. So we've heard drill, baby, drill a lot today already. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more over the next few days. But what about refine, baby, refine, right? So yeah, okay. So Mustafa, I'm going to bring you in a minute, but I want to go back to you first, Ayanda, because when we think about LPG or natural gas, we're talking about transition fuels, but when we look at the road fuels, I think conventional fuels are the transition fuels, right? Because EVs, fuel cells, they're still a little way off. You just bought a refinery. What are you planning to do with it? And is expanding refining capacity part of South Africa's strategy? Is it compatible with your energy transition plans?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that we are very excited about this new acquisition. And maybe let me just tell you a story about our refining position in South Africa. So we have 6 refineries. Of the 6 refineries, the smallest one is a 46,000 barrels per day refinery, which is currently not in operation because it's run out of gas. And then the biggest one is 180,000 barrels per day, which is the one that we have purchased. And it also is currently, unfortunately, not working. And when we look at how many of the refineries that we have currently, it's only 35% capacity that we have in the country, meaning that we've got to import the balance. So importing 60% of our product is really not, from a country point of view, it's not efficient, especially when you look at the high unemployment rate of the country. Essentially what we have done is we have exported some of the jobs. So if you look at the whole value chain, for example, downstream, there's a lot of jobs that we have outsourced because now we import those products as well, which is not good for the country. I think mostly from a security of supply point of view, that is very, very fundamental from our company's perspective. And we are a state-owned company. We have to support government in making sure that when there are market failures, we come in and assist. And not being able to provide that support from a refining capacity point of view is really a big challenge. There's also a negative impact on the balance of payments when you look at the economy as a whole. So why did we buy it? We actually want to make sure that we upgrade it. We know that when you look at the refineries these days, it's more economical if you go to 600,000 barrels per day upwards. And that's where we're looking. We are very ambitious. And we believe that it is going to ensure that we have more security of supply. You cannot outsource that because, again, there are many other variables that are outside of our control, which actually impact on us negatively. Look at the geopolitical tensions up north. That affects us. The supply chains get negatively affected. We import finished products, and that really impacts negatively on the economy because the prices, we cannot control the prices. We cannot control the price of oil, and it really becomes very chaotic. And that is why we believe that from a government point of view, in supporting government, we have to ensure that this newly acquired asset is upgraded, is repurposed, and we actually up the game and make sure that we have security of supply. And I think that is really the biggest intention of acquiring this SAPREF, and we're very excited about it.
Okay, well, I'm not surprised. These are very ambitious, very exciting plans. I'm gonna come to Gary in a minute and ask him to put a dollar number on some of these plans. But first of all, Mustafa, I want to bring you in. You've been very patient for the last half an hour, so I appreciate that. We're talking about cleaner fuels, right? And I'm gonna ask Gary to comment on the cost of transitioning from cleaner fuels. Annabelle mentioned some countries were still 10,000 ppm sulfur in their fuels. It's horrific. What's the cost of not cleaning up fuels from a human health perspective, from an economic development perspective?
Thank you for having me, Daniel, and my fellow panelists, and the audience, and also thank to the organizers of the African Energy Week for inviting an NMDPRA. So I'm from the NMDPRA, also known as the authority. Our mandate in Nigeria is to regulate both technical and commercial operations and infrastructural development in the midstream and downstream subsector of the oil and gas industry in a healthy, safe, efficient, environmentally friendly, and sustainable manner. So when you talk about clean fuel and also the drive by African countries to attain cleaner fuel, this is one of the key mandates of the authority. We've been talking about, from Mr. Anibo here said that we have more than 11 or 12 fuel specification in Africa, ranging from 10 ppm sulfur content to over 1,000 ppm sulfur content. So we know that these dirty fuel, they emit toxic substance, majorly, high sulfur, but not just high sulfur, we also have, carcinogenic benzene, and also manganese, which when it burns in our cars or machineries, it also emits toxic fumes that is very very dangerous and deteriorating to our health. And also damages our equipment. But let me talk about the health effect, which is very important to all of us. There's no cost to good health, public health is very important. So this dirty fuel, they actually cause air pollution, and it causes lung and heart diseases, and we know that it's very important to safeguard, the health of our people. But also on the other side, I mentioned that it damages machinery, and also it damages our cars in the long run. So we lose money. So that's part of the economic costs of not having cleaner fuel. But importantly, they also emit greenhouse gas emission. So having cleaner fuel will reduce the amount of GHG emission that is there in the atmosphere. And also our targets, energy transition target and goals would basically be met, or in the other way will not be met if we are having dirty fuel. So that's also adding to environmental degradation. Another thing, we've been talking about sulfur, but there are other constituent of the dirty fuel like carbon that we know that damages the ozone layer, and also I mentioned sulfur, carbon, but there are methane, which are short-lived pollutants. They live for a relatively short time compared to carbon in their lifespan, but their effect and impact is huge. So those are the
Yeah, so
health and economic impact.
yeah, so really interesting. Obviously, sort of horrific health impacts across the continent. Obviously, a huge economic cost as well. People sick or unwell. People spending time collecting biomass for burning instead of using LPG. Um, Seems pretty obvious it needs to be cleaned up. Gary, how much is it going to cost? What's the cost of resolving this?
Is this working? Yep. Okay. Um, Actually, before I get to that,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that obviously we talked about the number, Animal mentioned the number of different grades, official grades. Doesn't mean to say that's actually what happens in the market, because people who import don't necessarily get the bad, the bad grades, because they don't exist anymore. So people,
Yeah.
it's a lot of quality giveaway in some imports. Um, but there are a lot of different specs, official specs, particularly in West Africa, and obviously the ARDA's been working really hard to try and push the harmonization of cleaner fuels, and it can be done. It's been done successfully in the East African community, so it's not impossible. Um, there have been several initiatives to harmonize as the benefits. We know that clear health, in particular, supply chain efficiency, which brings lower costs in supply, intra-Africa trade is important, and you get less product adulteration through smuggling and things like that. Um, and we've worked with ARDA and for ARDA with ECOWAS and the African Union on studies to promote progressively improving specifications following the ARDA's AFRI roadmap. But as Riverson said, it can't be just fuels in isolation. What we came out with when we looked at this was it has to be fuel and vehicles seen as one system. Otherwise, you're cleaning up your fuels and you're not getting the benefit because your vehicles are older. In many cases, we see catalytic converters of second-hand cars imported into Africa, particularly from Europe, have been removed before they arrive. So there's no benefit, no real benefit on cleaner fuels. So there has to be improved car fleets. So there also has to be well-maintained car fleets, so that they have to bring in maintenance, and that has to be enforced to get the maximum benefit from cleaner fuels. The part of the study we did for the EU was, yes, how much would it cost to
Come on, Gary, give us the
to
number.
clean up and upgrade African refineries? It was done a while ago, and at that stage, NGen was still running, and of course that's closed now. The NREF refinery in Deni in Zambia has now closed, and Khartoum and SAPREF are now not operating today. But then again, Dangote has started, and that's a clean fuels story. The study concluded that it's about $15 billion plus or minus 50%. So it doesn't sound very accurate, but I mean that it's that sort of figure, and that was at least about 5 years ago. Animal, 4. Okay, well, you can probably say that the costs have certainly not decreased.
Yeah. So it's a big number, but weighed against the health and impacts, the economic impacts, the supply security impacts that we've been talking about, I guess you could argue that it's not that expensive.
No, I think that's the point, and not only so obviously on transport fuels, obviously on LPG and cooking, and of course you say health, because it's particularly in LPG and clean cooking, health of women and children.
Yeah.
And that's why I think governments collectively have to put a value on their population's health.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to come back and talk about LPG in a couple of minutes, but I've got two really quick questions. You said Dangote is a clean fuel story. So Mustafa, coming back to you, Any plans to tighten specs with Dangote ramping up? What's the plan?
So as a Nigerian and all other Nigerians, we are all very excited about the coming of Dangote refinery. And in the authority, we've been giving Dangote refinery the needed regulatory, approvals and guidance for compliance. And we'll continue to do that as part of our mandate. There's a history to, cleaner fuel specification in Nigeria. So prior to now, we used to have what we call the 2006 Standard Organization of Nigerian Specification of Cleaner Fuel. This puts sulfur content beyond 1,000. Then in 2017, we now had the revised one, which is the 2017 specification, putting 150 for PMS and 50 for AGO. But implementation of the 2017 has been met with some consideration. And I believe as at that time, to even get the needed volume of cleaner fuel at that point would be very difficult even from the exporting countries. And then it was said that we have to wait just fast forward, the downstream sector has been fully liberalized now. There's no subsidy, so it's market-based, and we're trying to see the impact. So as at then, there was subsidy. So it was said that subsidy has to be removed first. We wait for Dangote refinery to come 3 months after production. We also have the national refineries, NNPCL refineries, that are going through maintenance and upgrade for them to come on board. But then come the PIA, and the PIA was very deliberate. The PIA, which is the Petroleum Industry Act, was signed on the 16th of August 2021, and Section 317, subsection 11, specifically talk about specification of petroleum product, and we are fully aligned with the regional specification, which is from the ECOWAS directive of 2022, which puts sulfur content at 50 ppm. And that has set for all imported product as at that time. Then for all local refineries, they've been given up to January 2025. But to implement that, the authority has been very deliberate in implementing that, especially from the beginning of this year to where we are. We've made sure that both imported AGO and PMS are within the 50 ppm limit. And thankfully, Dangote refinery is designed to even produce an ultra clean fuel, which is at 10 ppm, which also coincides with the AFRI-6 target of, I think, 2030. We'll all be working with that. I think importantly, while we work it from the regional angle, we also need to align national regulations with the regional angle. And that's exactly what Nigeria has done.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So exciting times, and we look forward to sort of further updates there. Helder, I'm going to come back to you in a minute and ask you about your strategy and how refining fits into your strategy. But I want to change the subject slightly and talk about LPG. It's come up a number of times already in the conversation. And Anibor, you recently hosted a forum, an LPG forum. Can you tell us a little bit about what the main takeaways were?
Right. Thanks, Daniel. Before I get into that, I just want to make a couple of comments about clean specs and how they've been addressed. We've heard about how the EAC has adopted clean specs and Ghana and all of that, but all of those have been done by imports, which is by the SAPREF acquisition is phenomenal because South Africa is reclaiming its energy security story by actually investing in refineries. That's very different. And to understand what this means, an example is Angola. Angola Oil and Gas, there's this big story about the Lobito corridor and how this impacts on the broader energy security. Everybody talks about critical minerals and all of that. The Lobito corridor runs from Lobito in Angola to the DRC for cobalt. It runs to Zambia for copper. The trains that are going to run from Lobito to Zambia and the DRC, they're not going to run on crude oil. They're going to run on fuel. The mines that are producing are going to run on fuel. So until you start having a real discussion about the multiplier effect of not having cleaner fuels, all these trains and all of that are going to have an issue. And to just put a number to it, Ghana, at the Ghana International Petroleum Conference, the guy in charge of the mining said in Ghana, they spend up to $1.5 billion a year on fuel for the mines. So just to understand and underscore why this SAPREF initiative is so significant. Now switching to LPG, a couple of things. Number one, Clearly, LPG is part of energy transition for Africa because ultimately it reduces carbon emissions significantly compared to biomass. Two, to pick on Riverson's point, accessibility and affordability are critical. First of all, when we're talking accessibility, it's not just about putting storage facilities in place, it's about the entire LPG value chain up to the last mile, ensuring that we can get beyond the big cities to the rural areas. So looking at things like pay-as-you-go technology, looking at things like what Bid Hassasa is doing in Kenya and Uganda on how they're reaching that. The third thing is, for affordability, it's very critical that you must have, and I know subsidy is a bad word, so we need to flip the script and talk about why is LPG not included in the carbon markets discussion? Why can we not get carbon credits for LPG to help in making it more accessible and affordable to Africans, given that it's clearly a carbon emissions reduction? But the fourth, another thing is, which was very interesting, is that we need to create an African market for African LPG. What do I mean by that? We've heard a lot about drill, baby, drill. One of the key things that's a byproduct of drilling, you can extract LPG from that. Why is it that my other members import the LPG from the United States, whereas they have oil producers in their countries exporting from those same countries? Why can we not have a robust intra-African LPG market that balances so overall the net imports from the continent reduce over time?
But well, why can't we? What needs to happen?
We need to have clear political will to invest in the infrastructure required to do this. For example, Nigeria LNG exports LPG from Bonny because a lot of the, and my brother from NMDPRA can corroborate this, a lot of our members, their infrastructure is too small to take an LPG vessel from Bonny LNG. So we need to start looking at world-class infrastructure investments to allow us start to do that. Also, we need to start looking at where are the markets? Where's the population going to be? There's a World LPG roadmap that we're going to be discussing and it's going to be launched at COP next week. There were 11 countries on that strategy that the World LG Association is looking at. And the usual suspects were there: South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya. But one conspicuous country that was missing was Ethiopia, which is going to have the second largest population in Africa. So we need to ensure that for LPG, we need to, one, make sure that it's affordable and accessible, make sure that we start to produce African LPG for African markets with the right policies, the right frameworks, ensuring that we're part of the international discussion, particularly on carbon credits, to make it more affordable for our citizens.
Yeah. Great point. So, Mustafa, I'm going to come straight back to you. What are you doing to incentivize LPG uptake in Nigeria as your role as the regulator?
So the regulator and the Nigerian government is doing a lot in terms of trying to drive local utilization of gas, and particularly LPG. Even from the PIA, the PIA is very robust and very particular about gas, and the way if you look at the gas licensing regime, right from when you take it from upstream to the city gate and the last mile. And there are a number of government initiatives, knowing fully well that gas has been adopted as our transition fuel. So the years 2021 to 2030 has been, termed as the decade of gas.
Yeah.
So we've been working very closely, and he just mentioned the Nigerian LNG. The NMDPRA has been working with the Nigerian LNG, and as at 2020, 100% of production of butane and propane, which leads to LPG, has been dedicated to the local market.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And we've been also working with, it's a directive from the Honorable Minister of Oil, Resources, Gas, to work with Chevron and other IOCs to make sure that, production, their propane and butane production is also, targeted to the local market. And this is just for gas, but we also need infrastructure to get the gas to the last mile. And Nigeria, with a population of over 200 million people and about 30,000 or 30 million to 40 million homes, I'll tell you
Yeah.
the percentage of homes that are using cooking fuel is very, very small. So we want to get this gas to the people. So you need to build infrastructure. And that's where the market is an opportunity for investors to come in. And in the Nigerian midstream, the authority, we have a directorate, which is the Midstream and Downstream Gas Infrastructure Fund. Just last month, that directorate disbursed over 122 billion naira, to local investors to be able to de-risk investment and co-invest in gas infrastructure that will
Yeah.
also actually, leverage on bringing this gas and particularly LPG
That's
to the
that's
market.
huge. So it's a big part of your plans. What about next door, right? What about in Ghana, Riverson, right? It's booming. Your country is booming. Is LPG part of the development around the petroleum hub? Is it something that you guys are focused on?
Yeah, I think from the production perspective, um, there's been very, I think, consistent government initiative to support LPG deliveries and usage in the country. And I will start from when gas was discovered in Ghana. Just to be very brief, the government initiative was to prevent natural gas from being any product from being exported, but utilized. So that brought forth to the Ghana Gas Company being established. So as it stands today, 30 to 40%, depending on the availability of LPG from Atuabo, incorporates the demand and supply in the country, i.e., 60% roughly is imported, whilst 40% to 30% is locally produced. And that's the supply, that's the supply bit. Um, what the regulator, like NPRA, also have been doing for the past years, of being getting the price of gas, that's LPG,
Yeah.
a bit cheaper than it used to be by implementing what has been done in Kenya. There's a bidding rounds to kind of bring the premium of the LPG imported price down. And I think that's I'm very proud of the regulator for doing that, and that's control of the affordability aspect of the three A's. And what the regulator is also implementing today is the CRM um, policy to make sure that gas is accessible to every individual across the country. So I believe, as far as LPG is concerned, there's a boom, and like Kat also said, the demand for petroleum product across Africa is increasing. And for obvious reasons, we all know that it's time that we take control over the full value chain. And
Yeah.
I ask myself, why now? Why are we now going to put on a petroleum hub? Um, when we started, producing oil and gas for more than a decade, you know, and when we knew that gas was important, we had to set the gas infrastructure plant.
Yeah.
And last month they signed the under contract to build a gas processing plant train two back in Ghana. So when crude oil was discovered, what did the government what government policy was implemented to make sure that we also harness the entire value chain by having a petroleum hub? Um, for me, my personal question has to do with the petrochemical aspect of it and
Yeah.
also the ammonia aspect of it. We've run the models, and we all know that to have an ammonia plant, you should have your gas, which is a feedstock, less than $3 per MMBTU. Today,
Yeah.
the average gas price in Ghana is more than $8.
Yeah.
That's a very big question mark. Where are you going to get the gas from? The gas from Nigeria is not that cheap, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of financial obligation that we need to look at.
Yeah, so I think you're saying the importance of long-term planning, the importance of having a holistic view, and I want to bring you and Helder here and ask you about your strategy longer term. We've spent a lot of time talking about the immediate priorities, but longer term energy transition, how does that fit into your strategy?
Well, I'm looking for your clock. And my question is, how can I show a long-term strategy for Sonangol in 2 minutes? But let me tell you, like, If a couple of years ago someone come to me and say that I would spend 40% of my time with the refinery, I would say that person would be crazy. So what we're doing today is a strategy to have 3 new refineries in Angola, one with 200,000 barrels a day, the Lobito refinery, as everyone knows. Soil refining also is on thinking with 100,000 barrels a day. Cabinda will be running out second quarter next year with 30,000 plus 30,000 barrels a day. So in doing that, most of my work is today is to find the right financial structure. What would be the financial structure available and possible to create those refineries? Going with from my first comment, we need to continue to increase, and is as our strategy, you aim to have like at least 10% of the total production in volumes from Angola. Today we are 2%. We continue to do the clean energy. We have 2 pipelines, so was already mentioned here. So it's a strategy to continue to have those investments on renewables. And one thing that someone talked slightly, and I want to leave here before I finish. Our long-term strategy is also related to the critical minerals. And our minister already commented this morning. So our critical minerals, we are saying, on upstream point of view, explore, developing, they call beneficiating, and transform. We do believe from our strategy on quartz, we can have the raw material to the renewable projects for the pipelines, all those things. Lithium, we can have the batteries, uranium. Well, I think, and I hope my colleagues don't get me wrong. So 2 minutes, I think it is. I think long-term strategy is like look for all the available possibility to create value while we can be more clean for this transition.
So value for now and value for the future.
Yes, sir.
So we're out of time, but Annabelle, I can see you want to make a final comment.
Yeah, just a final point on just building what he said. Any strategy without financing will remain a strategy. So to his point, you have to have the financing. But I just want to make it clear, there are 4 steps that must be in place before financing will ever show up. The first phase is that, do we have the regulatory frameworks to support financing over the investment horizon, which is not 1, 2, 3 years, it's longer than that. The second stage is, do we have wish lists, or have we done adequate project preparation to define the scope, cost, and schedule of the projects that we're trying to execute? The third phase is there an ESG component to this financing we're trying to do, and how are we building that, whether it's decarbonization and refining, whether it's LPG production in upstream. The fourth phase, which I think is the most critical and is the most overlooked, is where is the human capital to execute these projects over the investment horizon? Raise your hand if you're going to be 40 years old or younger by 2030 in this room. Because if you're not part of energy transition. I see that gentleman over there. But the reality is we need to do a lot more about human capital development to ensure that we can put in place the people who are actually going to deliver this energy transition for us.
There's 4 great points to finish with. We are out of time. This has been a great conversation. I think 2 pieces of feedback that we'll give NJ. One, extend the panel for a second hour so we can kind of talk about more topics. And secondly, bring more diversity into the panel. So maybe not have a white European male moderating next time. But many thanks to the whole panel. Many thanks to you all for being with us.
All right, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of proceedings here.